Maybe you've been to the British Museum and to the Egyptian exhibition. Maybe you've seen the Rosetta Stone, and maybe you've seen some of the mummies and sarcophages in the exhibition. Now, you may, of course, assume, as we all might do, that these are original artifacts, and they are. They were taken from Egypt and brought to London to be exhibited in the British Museum. But perhaps what they really are in fact no longer original artifacts, but what Jean Baudrillard might call simulacra. Now, why is that? How can an original, seemingly original historical artifact actually taken from Egypt become a mere simulacra, a copy without an original? Well, let's see. In his lectures on aesthetics, Hegel famously states that ancient Egypt is the land of the symbol. In our age, the land of the symbol has been reduced to a repository of signs, of empty signifiers, like the mummy, that must serve as some sort of simulated past that guarantees us that we indeed have history, and serve as an anchor for some sort of imagined mythic origin and past. Hence the mummy, a sacred anchor between this world and the afterlife, intricately interwoven into the fabric of cosmic meaning, of Ma'at, can also be reduced to a pop cultural signifier in horror movies, entirely bereft of its sacred symbolic significance. In his seminal work Simulacra and Simulation, Jean Baudrillard sees in the rotting mummy of Ramses II, quite the beginning of the book, several layers of hyperreality at work, which I'm going to address here. Before I, however, address these, let me mention, just for context's sake, that in 1975, French researchers at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo noticed that the mummy of Ramses II had begun to decay from making it available to the public in a museum. That is quite hilarious if you think about it. Hence, in September 1976, the mummy was flown to Paris to save it from parasitic fungal infection. Only by advanced technology, beginning with the aeroplane, if you think about it, continuing with specific simulations, could the mummy be saved. In fact, because of its delicate condition, the French scientists could not risk experimenting on Ramses' actual body. To ensure the treatment would be safe, they used material simulations, microbiological models, and diagnostic mock-ups. To save the real king, no longer a king of course, to save the object, science had to create clones, mock-ups, and statistical models of Ramses' skin, hair, and pathogens, making entirely transparent the condition of the mummy as a mere specimen, however. But this removes the mummy, of course, the actual mummification of the body of the pharaoh, from its symbolic order. In order for ethnology to live, its object must die. But even previous to all of these scientific operations and modeling about the condition of the mummy being removed, that I'm going to get into, being removed from its natural order, its symbolic order, let's say, is in fact already no longer the very mummy it once was. So again, in order for ethnology to live, its object must die. The publicly displayed mummy now is prey to worms and science alike. To stress this again, as Baudrillard does, the mummy of Ramses II started decaying because it was presented in a museum. Hence, what we can witness here is something peculiar about our age. We are stockpiling the past and history because we sense that both truth and the past are disappearing for us. And our relentless effort to make accessible all past events through science and its various methods, to make it visible and transparent, and this is the case for natural science as well as the humanities, the Humanwissenschaften. Hence, to enwrap in our order of the sign that which is hidden, enigmatic, and mysterious, reserved only for a few mortals and for the gods, that turns this into a desertification of the truth of the symbolic order which now sets in. The West is seized with panic, writes Baudrillard, and it is significant that the West seems more concerned with this than the Egyptians at the time. And he continues, at the thought, so the West is seized with panic at the thought of not being able to save what the symbolic order had been able to conserve for 40 centuries, but out of sight and far from the light of day. End of quote. The irony is that the mummy of Ramses II, of course, again to mention this, begins to rot precisely only when it is torn from its secretive hidden order, an order that we cannot grasp with our scientific methods, be they the methods of history, of historiography, or the methods, of course, of microbiology, for example. The mummy, which should not rot at all and which didn't rot for 40 centuries, because our way of preserving is a different kind of preserving. We preserve for the sake of preserving a dead object. A museum is a tomb, is a graveyard. The Egyptians don't preserve the body of Ramses for the sake of mere preservation, extending the life or the lifespan, as it were. No, they preserve the mummy or the body as a sacred vessel that bridges this world and the afterlife. So our preserving is a clinical preserving for the sake of maintaining not the mystery of the cosmos, or meaning and sustained meaning and life itself, but our order of empty signifiers. One such signifier is extended lifespan, with the don't die movement, etc. What we see in a museum, even though the real mummy of Ramses II, of course, might be here exhibited, whichever museum it is in now, is in fact a simulation of history. So we don't see the genuine object at all, ever, because it is torn from its relationality. By frantically trying to make visible the invisible, our age tries to hide the fact that we have lost any genuine relationship with the past. We go to the museum to reassure us that we have a past, but the mummy removed from its symbolic order loses its essence. It loses its sacredness and is transmuted into a mere biological specimen, to be preserved as such. Hence, transmuted it is into a signifier for a past that never was, but that is purely an imaginary anchor for us. So you see the layers of simulation building up to where it is actually just a copy without an original in the end. Quote from Baudrillard, when the real is no longer what it was, nostalgia assumes its full meaning. And so does a sort of longing for authenticity, as Baudrillard also notes, a nostalgia for an origin that never was and never was ours, but in our crazed mummification of the past, in its musealization, to use his word, we kill the very objects we wanted to preserve by preserving them. We kill them by preserving them. We are like Orpheus, as Baudrillard says, forever killing what we long for the most. Ramses II means nothing for us. He cannot mean anything for us because his world is not our world. Quote, only the mummy is of an inestimable worth because it is what guarantees that accumulation has meaning. Baudrillard continues, the mummy must be preserved not as a sacred vessel binding together different spheres of the cosmos, but to guarantee continued access to the past as a sort of warehouse that soothes our anxiety over our lost access to history, making available the mummy for the general public and for science, however, secures its decay. We could be a bit, speculative, let's say, and say that the more eyes that see the mummy, the quicker it decays, because it isn't for the many to see. The mummy decays even without the scientific definition thereof. So it might even decay in a very different, let's say, metaphorical way. Its public display is its decay. Quote from Baudrillard again, only absolute secrecy assured the mummy its millennial power, as Baudrillard sees with incredible clarity a clarity that sometimes perhaps is lacking on the part of so-called anthropologists, ethnologists, etc. He continues to point out that the Egyptian had, quote, mastery over putrefaction that signified the mastery of the complete cycle of exchanges with death, which is to say, the ancient Egyptians upheld a symbolic order in which the intense negativity of death was pulled into being completely, mastered to such a degree that the Egyptians could maintain sacred permanence for millennia, upholding in this way the very cosmos, the universe itself. That's what they believed. We today, however, to quote Baudrillard, only know how to place our science in service of repairing the mummy, that is to say, restoring a visible order, whereas embalming was a mythical effort that strove to immortalize a hidden dimension. This hidden dimension remains hidden and must remain so. Hegel, by the way, sees the very same thing. It may have been that Baudrillard also read what Hegel had to say on Egypt. It is its hiddenness. Yeah, this dimension that is in question here is hiddenness itself. It may very well be that the mummy has for us deteriorated into an object of horror because there still lingers about it that sacred, forever hidden dimension that entirely withdraws from any access or availability, and it is that very hiddenness of which the mummy is testimony that scares us apparently so fundamentally, because all we know is a visible continuum. So it's that hidden dimension that frightens us, and thus in our psyche it's turned into an object of fear and of outright horror, whereas it is, of course, sacred and beautiful, let's say, to the Egyptians. Even though perhaps beautiful is the wrong word, but I just try to articulate what how we could think of it. It's the exact opposite of a sort of zombie-like entity that wants to kill, is somewhere between life and death. It is between life and death, but it is sacred in its regard, and it doesn't come back from the dead just to slaughter the living. So, and even though all we seem to be able to do is pull into visibility, the result is a sort of simulated visibility. So we believe to see the mummy just by its makeup of its microbiological pathogens, etc. And we can measure exactly how old it is and all these things, and that we fool ourselves is visibility. But that visibility itself is already sort of simulated, because we don't actually see the mummy itself, but we see the evaluations about it. We see our calculations and evaluations of it. The truly hidden cannot become visible. Hence, science makes visible what is not the mummy. Measurements about its state, its composition, its precise age, etc. We desire this full visibility for the sake of the mummy. The object, however, has already been, not for the sake of the object of the mummy, that's an important word here, because the object has already been killed. But we require this for our own sake, to imagine an origin again that never was. We dream, says Baudrillard, of an order that is not ours and of which we cannot make sense. By assuming the symbolic order of Egypt, by trying to make it accessible to us but on our terms and as our own past, we deny this symbolic order its rightful place. Now, this isn't to say that one shouldn't, engage with the ancient Egyptians. But if one does so, because there is a sincere origin here, and Hegel does this, of course, it has to be on their own terms. So one has to take seriously how they saw the cosmos, how they understood life. Only then will we, so the objects almost matter less than we might assume. Only then can we actually retain a certain access to it that is along their own terms or on their own terms. And I just mentioned this now briefly, that Carla Berenice has put together a very interesting course exactly on the Egyptian mind and on Egyptian life, exactly following this very line of thought, which is to access Egypt on its own terms and not attacking it. So you could just take a look at the course following the link in the description of this video. Museumification or musealization ensures extermination, says Baudrillard. Quote, because mummies don't die from worms, they die from being transplanted from a slow order of the symbolic, master over putrefaction and death, to an order of history, science, and museums, our order, which no longer masters anything, which only knows how to condemn. We don't master anything, but we control, and which only knows to condemn what preceded it to decay and death, and subsequently we try to revive it with science. So maybe I'll extrapolate a bit. What we do is we condemn anything that came before us in a sort of fundamentalism to decay and death. So we kill the original or condemn it to decay, and then we revive it with science. We pull the mummy out of its original symbolic order, put it in a museum, set it up for decay, which it hadn't decayed for thousands of years. And then we revive it with science, and then it becomes fully part of our symbolic, our order of science. And that is, of course, that's when the simulacrum is actually achieved. The mummy itself, and I'll get to this later again, it becomes a copy without an original. As strange as this sounds, because it seems like this is the original thing, but it isn't. It's gone. Ancient Egypt was the land of the symbol of a symbolic order that incorporated death to such a degree that this most terrifying immediate negativity became its core, so that a sacred permanence could uphold itself. Our order, an order of disarray, searches for a kind of permanence, but as it does not master death, our order brings with it decay and death. By placing death at the core, the Egyptians mastered death and produced stability and permanence. Ours, as we deny death and the hidden dimension, as that which cannot be made available and transparent, bring forth decay and corruption, a time without sacredness. Irreparable violence toward all secrets, the violence of a civilization without secrets, hatred of a whole civilization for its own foundation, as Baudrillard concludes his musings about the mummy of Ramses II. Our hatred for mystery, for that which cannot be explained and made available and controllable, hence our fascination with Egypt is based on a thinly veiled hatred for it, for its true dimension, that dimension of the hidden, of the secret, hence which for us becomes a source of horror. The mummy of Ramses II, even though historically determined to be his, measured, evaluated, and accounted for, with all the apparent precision our machines grant, and secured by the most advanced means of technological preservation against decay, a decay which only set in again because it was removed from its sacred symbolic hidden order, which, as anyone who can read will appreciate, Baudrillard implies was real. So Baudrillard believed that the symbolic order was real, or even we could perhaps even say is real still, and is real as long as it is left to its own devices and outside our hyperreal operations. This very mummy, even though verifiably, according to our thinking, of Ramses II, has itself become a mere simulacrum, a copy without original, because it's been torn from its interrelatedness with the symbolic order of which it is. It's been torn from its relationality, and so it no longer is what it has always been. Hence, the mummy has lost its ontological status, its being, and it has been transmuted, in fact mutilated, into a copy of and for the scientific models and evaluations that attack it and are pulled over it, a copy without, however, an original, as the original. So don't conflate the original with just the object as it's given. The original is that which is woven into, inextricably part of its own order, of its symbolic order. That's the original. Once it's torn from this, it ceases to be an original. It already becomes a simulation, as it were. But it's a full simulacrum by that point where its ontological status has been reduced to a copy without an original. The original disappears not because the object has disappeared, the object is right there, but the object itself is meaningless, ultimately, because it isn't any longer in any way part of its symbolic order, which is the only place where it makes sense. And hence, it is now a copy, and the copies are, for example, the many scientific models about it, its exact age, all the things, all the information we can gather about it, without an original. The original decayed the minute it was torn from its tomb. What remains is a simulacrum of which we perceive, what remains is a simulacrum of it, of the mummy, which we perceive through our hyper-reality, made up of scientific models, simulations, evaluations, measurements, media stories. Don't forget, we can probably watch VR goggles and, see what the mummy looked like, etc. And never shall we see the mummy for what it was, because the very dimension of hiddenness, of the truly sacred, is hidden from us, and our only way to see is not a seeing at all, but a constant measuring and estimating. So again, friends, for those who are still here, you've got a good attention span. That is a good sign in our order of science. Do take Carla's wonderful course on the Egyptian mind and approach Egypt in its own right. The link to enroll is in the description of this video. Thank you very much indeed.